Hello there, welcome to our second talk on contemplation. The overall subtitle for all of these talks I'm doing could be Contemplation, it is simple, but it's not easy. This second talk is a talk on what is sometimes called the true self, false self dynamic. One of the big questions, it seems to me, on the journey of faith is, how on earth do you change? How on earth do you become a better person? And one of the answers that we're often given as growing Christians or as young people is have faith, and the implication too is just try harder. And it seems to me that a lot of stuff to do with how we change boils down to having some tactics, following some rules and laws, and the overall impression is that being a person of faith is basically a moral concern, not a spiritual one. I have found this whole talk of true self, false self, which to be the most helpful thing probably in my own spiritual development, in helping me see how I could possibly change as a human being, which is difficult to do. So let's start. Let's say then that this circle here is our life. And we have an outward expression to our life as well as an inner expression to our life as well. And this outer expression of our life we could phrase in a lot of different ways. But basically, you could put a lot of things behind I am on this circle. It can be who I am as a person, what I do. Someone might be a bus driver, someone might be an accountant, someone might be a childcare nurse, someone might be a carer in a care home, someone might be a professor, and they put after I am one of those things. But it also explains a lot more than that about us. It can be actually who I am in character. I am a happy person, I am a sad person, and all of these things we can put around this circle here. And generally, it's often how we face the world. Now, we regard this outer circle often as being real life. This is what life is really about. This is robust, this is strong, this is indestructible, this is permanent. We're also aware too that somehow there is a sense of an inner life to us, which actually we have little access to or little sense of sometimes and feel less confident about than we do this outer expression of our life. This cannot be seen. This cannot be proved. If I am actually someone who actually mends roofs, I can show you whether I can mend a roof or not. But this here, this inner life, seems to be intangible, hard actually to pin down and say what it is. So this outer life is emphasised, especially today in our culture, and this we sometimes feel a little bit embarrassed about. So, what's really interesting is that the question is, who am I? Who are you? And when we go to a party, when we meet someone at a bus stop, when actually we go for an interview, or we're just chatting with people, we often say, well, what do you do? Trying to find out a bit about them. And we talk about this stuff around on the outside. I got down here my list: student, accountant, I am arty, and some it can be negative: I am vulnerable, I am fragile. Some people say I am strong, I'm a hairdresser, I'm a political person, I'm hopeless, I'm clever, I'm stupid, I'm a minister, I'm a musician. And we can talk about these things. Now the assumption is that this is who we are, this. This actually, in spiritual terms, is not who we are, it is who we think we are. Subtle difference. This is who we really are. This is who we think we are. This is who we really are. Now, how might you define this? Well, I don't know really. We just have a sense it is there. Different words are used for it, like spirit or soul, the real self, the essential love, the image of God, Christ within us. The interesting thing is, while we have felt this is real, and this is somehow intangible, and this somehow is permanent, this actually is quite fragile. The opposite is in fact true. This is permanent, this is eternal, this is indestructible, and this is who we are. This is who we think we are. It's a human construct. So I worked for a while in prisons, and I used to do this talk with prisoners, and I'd say to them, we know what a brief is, a lawyer or a barrister. That is someone who actually fights your case for you, you hope. Now, a barrister or a lawyer is just really a human idea, human construct. We say that people who deal with pieces of paper, deal with the law, fight cases, etc., etc., we call them a lawyer or a barrister. It's just a role they have. It's just an agreement we have as a human society that, in fact, these people will be lawyers or barristers. And you could say too for all the other jobs that we have as well, which are around us. So very significant. This is who we think we are. You know, this is a lawyer. We've thought about this. We've made our mind up about this. But this is who we really are. This is indestructible. This is permanent. There's nothing actually that can harm this. Now, modern psychology would call this outer life ego. From the Greek, Latin, I am, ego. Thomas Merton, who was very helpful in helping us sort this out, sadly he died in the late 1960s, he called this outer life here the false self. And he called this inner life the true self. Now the danger is, because we've been brought up with some sort of Greek background, is that we say, this is bad and this is good. No, let's not get into that dualistic divide. This is just who we think we are. This is who we really are. So this is actually surprisingly needy and fragile and vulnerable. And we put a lot of energy day to day in keeping this show on the road. So I've been a vicar of a parish. I like to think I was quite good at being a vicar of a parish. But all the time I'm thinking, must make sure I'm okay, I'm doing the job properly, I look okay, from the guys down the road in the next church, etc., etc. Or if you think you're a smart aleck, you're very clever, you've got to, in all situations you find yourself in, make sure in fact that people realise that you're clever, you're smart and you're wise. This is always looking to protect itself and to protect its reputation. This is obsessed with image. What do people think of me? Reputation, status, role. And if you can't be good, they say, well, be bad. If you can't be famous, be infamous. So some people want to be infamous, want to be the bad boy, the bad girl. And because of all of this is who we think we are, this takes a lot of maintenance to keep the show on the road. I once knew a guy who was a bus driver on the Wirral, and he thought he was an excellent bus driver. He drove his bus well, he didn't have any accidents, he drove a nice smooth journey for his passengers, he thought he's probably one of the best drivers on the Wirral, he didn't damage any of his buses, or actually any route he went on, he was fine, he knew about it. So he had a strong sense of full self, of ego, that in fact, I am a good bus driver. Until one day, sadly, he murdered his wife and ended up in prison. No longer is he a bus driver. See, these things are not permanent. At any time, for whatever reason, you can stop being some of these things. I know people who go, I'm a parent, and then their only child dies. Where are they then? They're still a parent in some senses, but not the same sense as they were before. So, this is actually the false self. So the false self and the ego is not necessarily bad. It can be. But in fact, it is necessary. And I've always said that if my wife and I didn't play the role as mum and dad and actually exercise our ego, our children would never have got to school. They'd have stayed in bed all day. So the ego is not wrong. It's just that's the role I had at the time. Now they're grown up, they can get themselves up. So this fragility for me, I'd be a vicar outside church, as people came out going, "Thank you, vicar, nice sermon, vicar," and someone would come out and go, I thought that was a rubbish sermon, you know. And how we take criticism because this feels under threat and this is what we think life is really about. So, the false self is not able to love. It's always asking though, am I lovable? It always tries to control things, fix things or understand things. And often too, it wants to feel superior more so than someone else. Oh, this government, they should sort themselves out. They have no idea what they're doing. Well, there we are. We've all done that. So let's talk about the true self. So surprisingly, the true self is robust and indestructible. It cannot be harmed, it cannot be damaged, it cannot be removed, it cannot be undermined. It is real and permanent because it is who you are eternally. It doesn't need the constant reassurance of, you're doing a good job, you're okay, you know. Deep down, the true self knows it's fundamentally okay and everything is okay. It is joyful, secure, it has a sense of abundance about it, it is courageous, it is peaceful, and it doesn't need to assert itself like the false self has to now and again, just to keep its end up. And at times, we've all experienced living from here, without really knowing it, if you just think about it. Sometimes probably you've been out in nature, and you've been out in the countryside walking with a friend, and it's just such a beautiful day. And all the concerns and worries about stuff at home or stuff at work or stuff with their family just seems to be not there at the moment. And you're in the moment, you're present in that place, and it's just wonderful. It might be you walk to the top of a mountain to see the sunrise, and as the sun rises, you're stood there with a friend and you go, wow, this is amazing. You're in the moment. This is what it feels like to live in the true self. The birth of a child. When this child is just suddenly born, you're not worried about all the other stuff in life, whether you're a good bus driver or a good vicar or not. You're just there in the moment with this child. You're sensing this is what life is about. Interestingly, that can be true as well for the death of a loved one. I was by my brother's bedside when he died. It's very, very sad. But you know what? I just felt in that moment, what was happening there was the most important thing in the world. I couldn't care less what else was happening. I just felt a sense of closeness to my brother as he died and breathed his last. There's the arts, a piece of music you might sit through and you're just overwhelmed with the wonder and the glory of this magnificent piece of music. Or you go to an art gallery and see a painting, modern or ancient, doesn't matter really, and you just think it communicates something that I cannot express in words. Go to a play or to a recital of poetry. You read a book or watch a film. We've all had those moments when we know, I'm there. This is this. And sometimes it can be a feeling of exhilaration, of finishing some great feat, of doing some wonderful thing you thought you'd never do, run a marathon or climb a mountain or do a bungee jump or whatever. And two, we can find it in the silence of prayer, or just in the silence. That we're here, we're in this moment, that this is something more than just this stuff on the outside of life. It might be the wonder of a hymn, a song, or a prayer. When we're living from here, we're not concerned about status. We're not concerned about our role, what people think about us, our reputation in relation to other people. We are just there, and we are just living life. So, when we're living from here, from the false self, we often find that we're competing and we're comparing ourselves with other people. Isn't it interesting that Jesus says, do not judge. Don't make a judgment about them. They do what they do and you do what you do. How you stand in relation to them is irrelevant. Competing, comparing, analysing, critiquing, and over-identifying with the role. It's not wrong to critique, it's not wrong to criticise at times, but actually, when that is where we're living from, that's where our life comes from, it is actually destructive. A clue that you know you're living from here is actually that you're offendable. It's interesting that Jesus was only ever offended by what the rich did to the poor or the powerful did to the weak. When people did stuff to him, or tried him, or persecuted him, or attacked him, he never showed any sense of offence. But if you invest in this, and this is attacked, you will get offended because that is all there is. And it's sad that so much religion, Christian and otherwise, has been and is so offendable. So offendable. Do you know what they say about Christians? I never find any of that in Jesus whatsoever. If we're living from the true self, there is nothing to defend. Because it cannot be harmed, it cannot be taken away. The problem is when we live too much from the false self. The false self can't deal with love, it can't deal with death, and it can't deal with mystery because it can't control, fix them, or understand them. The false self settles for easy answers. Oh, that's just so-and-so. That's just the way it is. Oh, that always happens. It reduces things down to a simple level so in fact it can be done and dusted and put in a compartment and dealt with. It's to do with having a sense of control over situations. Yes, it sees things in a dualistic way. Oh, they're great. Or they're rubbish. Oh, they're wonderful. Or they're stupid. It's good, bad, smart, stupid, us, them, black, white. Always dividing the world up. So then, what do we do with all of this? Well, you might be surprised to know that the false self isn't exactly the problem. And you go, but you're telling me it is, Graham. No. Listen me through. The false self in and of itself is not a problem because it isn't necessarily wrong. I need to have certain roles in my life, fulfill functions in order to earn some money to keep the roof over my head and feed my family. The problem is not the false self. The problem is our attachment to the false self. Our attachment to the false self just creates and compounds the problem, and our addiction to it to such a degree that in fact we don't want to give up our attachment to this. Why would I give it up? If as a vicar I'm the best one around, if I'm the smartest vicar around, I've got the most people coming to church and sitting on the pews, the best activities running, why would I give up that reputation when people think I'm so wonderful? Fortunately, they didn't always think I was wonderful. But if I'm good at something, if I'm smart, if I'm playing the bad boy and I do it really badly or really well, depends how you see it, why would I give up that reputation? Because for most of us, for many of us, it's worked for us for years to one degree or another. We like to be better. We like to have a clearer idea. We like to have better opinions than somebody else. And I've known people who go, he's so outspoken. And it just butters up the guy to be even more obscure in his opinions and what he says than he was before. I found that I got through life a lot through being the joker, making people laugh. I know that with my mother I learnt the skill, and my father, if they told me off, I'd make them laugh. And sadly, I've used that trick all through life, really, and you have a bit of a reputation of being a bit of a joker sometimes. But it's hard to give that up when actually it's worked, for over 60 years. But if we build a life on our attachment to this, and this starts to crumble, then in fact we wonder who on earth we are. We feel, when we're attached to this, which we all are to one degree or another, that we cannot be happy without it. We can't be happy without a certain job. We can't be happy with the children behaving in a certain way to us and regarding us a certain way. We can't be happy if we haven't got a certain reputation in the community or within the church or wherever it might be. And when this starts to fall apart, it does feel like dying. And sometimes we go to some extreme lengths to try to protect this and keep it in place. Listen to these verses. Jesus says, "Very truly I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains just a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit." Something has to die. John 12, that is. From Luke 9. "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves, take up their cross daily and follow me. For those who want to save their life," you could say the false self, "will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will save it." St. Paul says, "I have been crucified with Christ, and it is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me." Galatians 2. 1 Corinthians 15. He says, "I die every day." What is all that dying about? In Paul's writings, he don't call this ego or the false self. He uses a word which in the Greek is sarx, and often is very hard to translate. It's often translated as the flesh, and we've grown up with the whole idea, in fact, that there's something wrong, basically wrong and shameful about our bodies. This word sarx isn't actually to do with the body. It's a different word Paul uses for body, which is the word soma. This word is to do with the false self, all this stuff around here. Something has to die, and it is our attachment to the false self. So, how then do we loosen our attachment to this false self that we all have? How do we break it? Because trying to be good, trying harder, actually doesn't work. And Paul agrees in Romans 7, I try to do what is good, I can't do it. I try to avoid the bad things, I still do those. So how is it we change? Well, let me just say, there's only two ways in which we will give our attachment to the false self up. One is great love, and the other is great suffering. And the saints say, for most of us, it's great suffering, because actually we're too stubborn to let great love transform us. Let me give you an example. Peter, the chief disciple, the apostle of Jesus. In Mark chapter 8, Jesus says to disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they go, "Wow, John the Baptist, Elijah, one of the prophets." And then he says, "But who do you say I am?" And Peter blurts out, "You're the Messiah." In Mark 14, they come to the Mount of Olives, and it's not long before Jesus will be arrested, put on trial, and eventually killed. And Jesus says to his disciples, "You will all become deserters, for it is written," and he explains the text. And Peter goes, "Even though all the others, become deserters, I will not." So Peter's false self is actually, I am not a deserter. The others are. I'm not a deserter. I'm faithful. I'm reliable. And Jesus says to him, Peter, before the cock crows, before the morning, you will have denied me 3 times. And you probably know the story well, that when Jesus is arrested, he's taken to the high priest's house, and Jesus is in there, Peter's outside by the fire, and a little girl goes, aren't you one of those followers of Jesus? No, says Peter. No, not at all. And another girl comes and goes, you've got a northern accent. You must be one of those. You're with Jesus, aren't you? No. Eventually a bloke comes and goes, you're one of those followers of Jesus. And the text says, especially in John's Gospel, Peter went outside and he wept bitterly. I'm reliable. I won't let you down. I'm not the sort who gives in like the other disciples. I'm different. I'm Peter. I'm the one you gave a special name to. I'm the top boy of all 12 disciples. But now he wasn't. He was outside the courtyard weeping and sat against a wall in self-pity that he'd let his Lord down. Now, so the attachment to his reputation has been shattered. But it's not the end of the story, of course. When we come then to John chapter 21, the men are fishing on Galilee, the disciples, and they spot Jesus, and they bring the fish in and they have breakfast. And Peter must be thinking, at some point Jesus will want a word about me, denying him. And eventually too, it seems that Jesus says, Peter, can I have a word? And I don't know about you, I'd be thinking, oh my goodness me, I know what's coming next. But what is coming next? Jesus says to him, do you love me? He doesn't mention the fact that Peter said he would not deny him. He doesn't mention the fact that Peter did deny him. He doesn't mention the fact that Peter did deny him 3 times, just as Jesus said. Jesus doesn't get into this whole thing of saying, well, I was right, Peter, and you were wrong. He just asks him the simple question, which is more to do with this than this. Peter, do you love me? Are you going to live from here? Or are you going to live from here? Are you going to live from here? Can you do it? And Peter sort of says, yes. So it's an interesting passage, I think. And yes, I will love you. And so Peter is restored, and from there onwards, of course, his writings seem quite different. There's the parable of the prodigal son, who's really into this stuff. I want my share of the property now. I want to be good. I want to look smart. I want to be wealthy. I want to go off and have my own life. And he went off and impressed people and had friends, had parties. You come, I can provide for you. I can do all this for you. And eventually, of course, we know the story. The money runs out and he lost everything he had. He tried to seek happiness through what he had. But of course, when that goes, of course, the happiness does as well. And a severe famine came, and he found himself looking after pigs, which of course is bad for a Jewish boy. And through great suffering, he comes to his senses and sets off to his father and said, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm not worthy to be called your son. Yet interestingly, he was still the son when he got back. Get a robe, put a ring on his finger, get the fatty calf out, let's have a party. This cannot be destroyed. But he had to learn the hard lesson. Let me tell you of a more contemporary story. The name Christopher Foster might not mean a lot to you, but in 2009, a story came on in the newspapers. And Christopher Foster and his wife had a daughter, 14 years of age, and they were the family who seemed to have it all. There were photographs of them going out, they had stables, they went out for nice meals, they were all sort of good looking, they had nice cars, nice house, a paddock, they had it all. And one day, there was a tragedy at the house. And what happened was this. Christopher Foster got one of his guns, he shot his wife, he shot his daughter, he shot the horses, He set fire to the house, he set fire to the stables, and then he shot himself. Why? Because the whole thing was a scam. This successful businessman, successful family, we've got it all, trying to keep it all afloat. He was peddling faster and faster and faster, and the money was getting shorter and shorter and shorter, but he never ever said there's a problem. It was all okay until he couldn't face the shame, and he found it easier, in fact, to end it all for him and his daughter and his wife, rather than actually face the downward journey. And actually, he missed finding this. So the invitation is, if we let go of this, we will find this, if we're open to find it. If we let go of this in bitterness, we will just be attached to the resentment that in fact we no longer have this that we used to have. I used to be someone, I used to have many cars, I used to have holidays abroad. Bitterness is not going to help us get rid of our attachments. The giving up, the surrendering of them is in fact the answer. Let me tell you quite a different story, and that's a lady I knew in one of my parishes who was very private, very controlled, spinster in her, about 60 years old. She had a very detailed, controlled job working as a librarian for a chemical company. She had her life very ordered, very tidy. She didn't like you turning up as a vicar and just banging on the door. You had to book an appointment to see her. And she had it all sorted. She lived her own single little life, and she had friends from the church who she got on with, and that's how it went. And then one day, she was diagnosed with cancer of the colon, which for her was going to be one of the worst things possible, because it was a dirty, painful business. She probably had a stoma bag, I don't know. But in fact, she went for treatment, and the whole thing was actually quite, for someone who's so private and a lot of privacy about her own life, found it completely shaming to go through the treatment for cancer of the colon. And she said to me, do you know what, Graham? She said, my cancer has been the worst thing that's ever happened to me, and also the best thing that's ever happened to me. And she found that through her spiritual journey, that she discovered this, that she would never have discovered if it hadn't been for her cancer. Now, I'm not saying God sends these things our way to make sure actually we get our act together. Life is full of random stuff and stuff we can't control, and sickness and illness. But actually, those things can help lead us to what life is really about. I've just finished reading a book called Late Fragments by a 36-year-old woman named Kate Gross. She's a wife and mother of 2 young boys, twins. And in this book, she's not a person of faith. She's not a person who would be religious in any way. She never expresses it in the book at all. But she says many things about her cancer. She says, someone asked me, what was the best thing cancer had given me? She said, I collapsed inside when she said that. Cancer is a pretty terrible kind of death. But she goes on to say, the disease gives as well as it takes. She said, as she's grown weaker, her delight in the world has grown stronger. And she says, job titles now are irrelevant. They're not the truth about who we are. It's just job titles, isn't it? And she says, the time I've had since I became ill has been beyond precious. This strange, razor-like clarity is something I wouldn't have found if the worst had happened. So difficulty and suffering, sometimes the suffering isn't big in terms of cancer or bankruptcy, but there's lots of things in life where we feel a bit shamed, or we feel people are against us, or we feel, that actually other people think that what we've done is a very good job, and we take a bit of a knock for it. Every day there are little humiliations in fact, where there's an invitation to start to let go of some of these. And so when Jesus says about taking up our cross daily, some sort of daily dying, and St. Paul says, I die daily, this is what it's about. Can I start to live a little less attached to who I think I am and who other people think I am? Oh, Graham's very good, you know. Well, he's not that good. He's just Graham. Like you're just you. We're just who we are. And sometimes we can put on a good show, and sometimes we can't put on a good show. And sometimes that's down to our own skill. Sometimes it's just down to luck. The luck of the draw, good fortune. So the invitation is, in these difficult moments, will I start to go, it doesn't really matter actually how many people come to my Sunday morning service. It's not what it's about. But it does matter that when I sit actually by someone's bedside, who maybe isn't a person of faith, can I sense the Christ, the goodness, the life that is there? In prison, I'd speak to prisoners who've done some terrible crimes, and I ask myself, can I see in that person what God sees in them? In this terrible environment, can I sense something of wonder and delight? Because that is where this is fired from. In my next talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about liminal space and living in the present moment, because actually to live more lightly to the false self is an ongoing exercise through life, and there are many places and times in life when in fact we can start to make some progress, when in fact it's God making progress on our behalf. All we have to do is to go, yeah, okay then. Thank you.